Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Anthropology 310, Origins of Human Diversity. It's the 30th of September. It's Monday of week 7. Today we're going to be talking about Homo erectus. We'll also this week be talking about the Middle Paleolithic. We talked about the lower last time. Now we're talking about the middle. So we talked about some of the human ancestors and cousins along on our human family tree. So we'll talk about Homo erectus today. Next time we'll talk about Neanderthals, and then on Friday we'll talk about some of the other lesser known cousins, which we have, including Denisovans and Homo floresiensis, who are human, Homo, just like us, but did not survive into the present. So we'll talk about where they live, how their lives are different, maybe both biologically as well as culturally different from modern humans, as well as what happened to them. You have homework number 4, discussion board number 4, and quiz number 4 this week. We're talking about Homo erectus today. We had some questions last week, which we didn't quite get to, but if you're still working on those, we'll talk about 2 major technological advances associated with Homo erectus today, and how can we see these in the archaeological record. And we'll also imagine you are Homo erectus with access to lower Paleolithic technology. What skills would you need to survive? What was the best part of being a Homo erectus? And what is the hardest? So if you haven't got those done, check it out. This week, for your homework, you're going to be doing another arts and crafts kind of thing, just like how you did your primate family tree. This time we're going to do a tree of some of the human ancestors and cousins, which we talked about. So you can see this is page 2. List all the species, just like how we listed the species on your primate family tree. So here's the location, here's the species, and here's how many years ago. And you're going to create something like this. What you're going to do, using the hominid chart, which I included, plot the range of known existence of each species. Do this by marking a chronology chart with a pencil for the maximum and minimum range. So if something is from 100,000 years ago to 20,000 years ago, you have a line like this. Markers with the vertical lines. You don't have to connect these because often it's unclear which species gave rise to who. So like if you see this, these are a bunch of lines, but it's not like your family tree where you connect them all, because right, it's kind of unclear sometimes. For best results, start with the oldest one, like Sahelanthropus chadensis. Plot the line vertically in the lower third near the bottom, then move upwards and kind of move your way over as you go. I put some samples, and I also brought some samples today. On the chart, MYA means million years ago. KYA is thousands of years ago. So 0.2 million years ago is 200,000 years ago. 1.4 million, 1,400,000 years ago, right? And then when you're done, you snap a picture and turn it into Blackboard. Decorate your chart for bonus points. More decoration equals more points. So here's the instructions on page 1 with a small example. I also have the examples up here I'm going to show you. Page 2 is your the species that you're looking at: Homo floresiensis, Homo sapiens, Homo naledi, Neanderthals, etc. Here are the dates in which they lived. And then here, if you're going to do it just on a piece of paper, you can print this third sheet out and mark them. If not, you can do something creative like these folks did. This one's really pretty. I put some like that. Ooh. Here's another pretty one. Feel free to use images off the internet. You can see this person also had an issue with drawing. We did a really nice one here. Yeah, but then they also printed these off and glued them on. Same with this one. Here's another one. Yeah, you got some skulls, you got some names, and you got some dates, right? The main objective here is so you can get an idea of how these things fit together temporally, right? Is Sahelanthropus before or after Neanderthals, right? It should give you kind of a good idea when you're done. Hopefully, because like doing these creative things helps stick in your brain a little bit better than if you're just like memorizing things. So after class, if you're interested, you can come up and take a picture if you want a reference, or you can just discuss it. Those are up here for you to take a look at. Okay, we got a lot to cover today. I want to talk about Homo erectus. It's our last of our lower Paleolithic cultures. Paleolithic means what? Paleo means old. Lithic. Stone, yeah, old Stone Age. And it's the lower Paleolithic. So archaeologists divide the upper, middle, and lower. We're going to use the same kind of typology in this class. So this is the earliest stuff that we found, right? We talked about Homo habilis last time or last week. Handyman, right? Homo habilis, habilis handy, hands, Homo human, right? The first in our line of Homo. This is genus, species, kind of Linnaean taxonomy. So from here on out, we've talked about some other hominids, but from here on out, we're only talking about members of our genus, Homo, right? So we'll talk about Homo erectus, Homo Neanderthalensis, Homo sapiens, things like that. Okay? So we're getting real close to us. And spoiler alert, by this time next week, we should be, if all things being good, be on to Homo sapiens, us. We'll be done with skulls and move on to culture. Today we're going to talk about Homo erectus. If you look at your chart, here's a chart. All right, so we talked about Homo habilis. We talked about a bunch of Australopithecus here. And then here is Homo habilis. Talked about 2.5, about 1.4 million years ago. And what's Homo habilis known for? What's their claim to fame?
For being tool-wise?
Yeah, they made tools, right? They were the first creatures to make stone tools, and we had an opportunity on Friday to see how hard it was. How easy is it to make a good stone tool? It's not. I mean, this is like my 8th year, and I'm still bad at like making stone tool. So I think that we often don't give Homo habilis enough credit, right? We're like, oh, these are simple stone tools, then we make it. This is terrible. Except myself, and all I've done is lay a bunch of rocks, right? We're talking today about Homo erectus, the descendant of Homo habilis, and really the one who leaves Africa and takes over basically the entirety of the old world and becomes the grandfather species of all the species we're going to talk about the rest of the week, whether it's Homo sapiens or Neanderthals or Denisovans or for instance, right? They're a really long-lived human species, about 1.5 million years when you think about our modern Homo sapiens. At best, we've been like 250 or 300,000 years. So this is, like 5 or so times as long on planet Earth as we have lived this whole time, right? Very long-lived species, and one that not only is biologically really different from Homo habilis, and in many ways, it's like the first modern-looking human. And here is a Turkana boy. I'll show you a little video on this. These are creatures that are no longer, small little ape men. This is a kid like 8 to 15 years old who's standing 5'3", 5'4", right? He's pretty much growing up to be the same stature as us and with large brains, right? Not as big as ours, but almost still about twice as big, a little bit less than twice as big as a Homo habilis. So an expansion of both the physical and mental capabilities. I'm going to show you just a quick video. I'll show you part of this. This is, if you want, these are great series called Becoming Human, which I put up on Canvas. You don't have to watch them all, but I think they are really interesting and help you kind of contextualize these different species. So I'm going to show you this little clip. It's about 5 minutes long about Turkana boy, the particular form of Homo erectus that they found, or a particular specimen. And then we'll talk about kind of broadly why it's important. So while we're doing that, I will also pass around some of these skulls and you can take a look.
Began much further back in time, millions of years ago. Imagine the entire span of recorded human history, about 5,000 years, taking us back to the Egyptian pyramids. Double 10,000 years to the time when plants are domesticated and agriculture begins. Double again, 20,000 years. Ice Age hunters are painting stunning images on cave walls, and keep doubling 6 more times. Only then do we encounter our ancestor, Homo erectus, in Africa's Great Rift Valley. For millions of years, this massive geological fault line running the length of East Africa was a stage on which our human evolution was played out. It all started with the first apes to walk upright on two legs about 6 million years ago. There were many different types, all variations on the same theme. Ape-like creatures with small brains. The fossil known as Lucy is the most famous example. Here she is, just 3 foot 8 inches tall, with a brain the size of a chimp's. For millions of years, creatures like her roamed the forests and grasslands of Africa. But then, something changed. About 2 million years ago, new creatures appeared with abilities never seen before in the animal kingdom. Meet Homo erectus, a toolmaker, hunter. One of the first members of our genus, the genus Homo, humans.
The transition to Homo is probably one of the most important transformations that occurred in human evolution.
Arms got thinner, legs got longer, brains got bigger. It was a huge evolutionary step from ape bodies to bodies like ours. But what about the things that make us distinctly human? Creativity, intelligence, caring for each other. How can we know when these got started? With only skulls and bone fragments to go on, how could we ever know what those first humans were really like? It would take a momentous find to shed light on their lives. Lake Turkana, northern Kenya, surrounded by volcanoes and vast expanses of baking desert. In 1984, famed anthropologists Richard and Lee Leakey were working at this remote inland sea.
I was actually on the east side of the lake, and Richard flew over and said, "You've got to come, there's something really exciting."
As the first family of paleoanthropology, the Leakeys were used to fossil finds. But this was very special. One of Leakey's team found a skull fragment of one of those early humans. He could tell from its size and shape it was Homo erectus. And there was more than just a fragment.
So we started looking at the side of the extensive basis, and of course, once we did, we found the rest of the skull.
A complete skull was rare enough, but it was just the beginning. Soon parts of the Homo erectus skeleton, which had never been found before, started to emerge.
We couldn't believe it, but we started getting pieces of ribs. These were the parts of Homo erectus that nobody actually knew about, nobody had ever seen before. So every bone came out of the ground was something brand new to science, and we were looking at these things, and it was really amazing.
And here they are, the actual bones of a human ancestor who lived over 1.5 million years ago. It's the earliest human skeleton ever discovered. The Leakeys called him Turkana. His bones have revolutionized our understanding of the transition from ape to human.
The really important thing about Turkana is how complete he is. We've got arms and legs and bits of his spine and his ribs. And usually when we find these things, we get very excited about one little bit of bone. But that little bit can't tell us very much about an individual. So having a nearly complete skeleton, we can start to ask big questions.
The first big question was, what did he look like? His skeleton tells us he was 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a build closer to a man's than an ape's. But how close?
Indeed, how close? And that's the question we're going to answer today. Okay, so okay. So and we saw this is again, this is Turkana boy. This is the fossil find they found. You can just kind of see again how just how complete this skeleton is, right? This is almost, you know, Halloween quality. You got ribs, you got arms, you got legs, you got hips, you got big brain. It's all right there, right? And I'm going to show you, pass these around. I have again, we're only going to do skeletons for a couple more today. So if you like skulls, if you don't like them, I'll pass it on. This is Homo habilis. This is what we looked at last time. It's like 800 cubic centimeters of brain capacity. This is modern human, talking about like 1700, 1800 or so, 1600, depending on our individual. And here is our Homo erectus, right in the middle. And in many ways, you can see that this is a major change over Homo habilis that came before. Number one is just like quantity. It's just a much bigger skull, and you'll feel it when it's in your hand. You'll also notice there is less post-orbital constriction right here. The brain is filling out, it's getting bigger, not only in terms of absolute quantity, but also it's filling out behind the eyes. Frontal cortex is important for planning and thinking and communicating and culture and all that, empathy and emotions. It's also like this one, but more so, it's raising up behind us and becoming more and more dome. You'll also notice that the face is much flatter. This one still has a little bit of this prognathic sticking, prognathism sticking out here. And here you'll see that again, it's much kind of flatter. We still have a brow ridge up here, which we have, we'll see kind of been going through Neanderthals this week, which is pretty different from what we might see in a modern people. But if you line these three up, here's our modern, here's our erectus, here's our Homo habilis. It's right in the middle, but it's actually, I think it's a little bit closer to this modern skull than to this. So major point being that it's a major change, and it's, it's pretty close to us. If you took a Homo habilis and you dressed him up, shaved him, gave him a good suit, put him on the street, you still would look a little weird. You'd be like, I don't know about that dude. But it would definitely be like, it wouldn't be like that guy escaped from the zoo, put him back in the cage. It's like, this guy's strange looking. And especially as we go forward this week with Neanderthals, it's going to become even more so, where they look more and more like us. So I'll send these three around. We're a little comparing and contrast while we talk. Skulls are a big part of it, but the postcranial is huge too, right? We're finally talking about people who, again, could like sit in this classroom, sit in a chair with you, and if you didn't look at them, right, here's the kind of a reconstruction of what they might look like. They have some features, this brow ridge and this little bit of prognathism. You're like, oh, that kind of looks strange. But 5 something, more or less the same build as you. As long as they didn't make too much noise in the back, we probably wouldn't even pay attention to them. We'll come back to that one next time. Homo erectus is an amazing species. While so far we've talked about Africa, we've been focused on Africa mostly with our apes. But as well with some of our early finds like our Australopithecus, Lucy's found over here in the Afar region, Tong child and Africanus found down here. Here's Turkana with Lake Turkana or Turkana boy, right? So far all of Africa. But what's really amazing to me, one of the coolest things I think about Homo erectus is this is the first species we see that leaves Africa, right? This is a major part of our human evolution is to like get out of Africa, right? And basically, we used to think that, it was pretty late in Homo erectus time where they finally managed to figure out that you can go this way and get out of Africa. But I'll show you a find right at the end at Dmanisi or Dmanisi, depending on how you say it, which it seems like it's just about as soon as Homo erectus evolves in Africa, they start to like fill up Africa and then head for all parts, old world, right? So they cross into the Middle East, then they go to Europe, they go to Asia, all the way up here to like Siberia, Lake Baikal. We see them down here in China, kind of near modern day Beijing. We find them in Southeast Asia. And then we find them even in these kind of near Pacific islands, like in Indonesia and in the Philippines, right? So I think of all the things that Homo erectus we're going to talk about, this is one of the most important, right? And they spread out and they become the basis for a lot of these other species like Neanderthals, which we'll talk about next time. But not just their globe-trotting, their globe-trotting nature. Homo erectus is really one of the, in terms of species that have accomplished big things. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to make like a timeline of great inventions in human history. Homo erectus we think of him as a caveman, but like in many ways, right? He's the first Edison or the first Einstein, like coming up with this big ideas and really changing the way that they interacted with their natural world. Probably one of the most most evident of this, especially from the archaeological record, is their tool use, right? They made a tradition called the Acheulean hand axe, and here's a great example of an Acheulean hand axe. This is kind of teardrop shaped stone tool. They're pretty large. They're like this big, too large to be like hafted onto a spear or something. It's probably not what's going on. But it's some kind of chopping mechanism. And for those of you who are here on Friday, just take a look at this and you can see just how complex this is, right? Where it's not just like a broken tool. This is people working both sides. They're usually super thin, like they're like this and they come down to a thin point. And I was trying that myself to make it really thin and it just kept shattering, right? So this is a really complex tool people theorize it's been used for digging, probably for breaking open bones, accessing marrow, also used for like scraping hides and making clothes and all kinds of stuff. Homo erectus, like I said, it existed for a very long period of time, about a million and a half years. And so there's been this question, is Homo erectus a scavenger like Homo habilis before it, or is he the first hunter? And probably the answer is yes, right? Probably those first ones were probably doing scavenging kind of stuff or opportunistic hunting. But by the end of Homo erectus's time, they are apex predators, right? So they're using tools, not just those stone tools, but making spears, using rocks, using clubs. And not only are they just scavenging what other creatures have hunted, they're actively going out and searching for it and making good use of their environment. And this is really important because we talked about brains last couple times, right? So as creatures get bigger, that takes more energy. And like we said before, gorillas have pretty much maxed out their day of eating leaves and sticks. It's like 90-something% of their day is spent munching. But they have pretty small brains, right? And as you add brains, it takes more and more energy to power that brain. It's about 8 times as much calorie fuel, to fill a gram of brain as it is for a gram of muscle, right? So we talked about Homo habilis, having those stone tools, right, allowed them to get more resources out of the environment because they were able to scavenge more effectively, cut meat off or break those bones open and get the marrow off from inside. And so Homo erectus takes this to another level. Again, they are able to get a lot more energy out of their environment, right? Calories per acre or square mile, however you calculate it, because they are actively hunting, right? Because they're able to get more resources and meat is more calorically dense than just chewing on leaves. The other major thing that allowed them to get more resources out of their environment is fire. Why would fire help you get more resources out of your environment? Definitely, right? Again, if you've ever tried to eat a raw potato, it's not very appetizing and you don't get a lot of nutrients out of it. But if you cook that potato, suddenly it's delicious, right? Same with meat. If you eat raw meat, sushi, it gives you some of those calories, but again, it's not gonna give you the full caloric benefit. When you heat things up in a fire, it has this tendency, both in plants and animals, to denature the proteins, to kind of unwind those really tight chains, and it allows your body to digest it a lot easier. If you're just eating raw stuff, you're going to poop out a lot of the good material because your body can't digest it. But as you cook it and you break down the food into simpler parts, your body is able to get a lot more out of that. Do you think there are any physical changes that might let us know that people are cooking their food? Not the cultural changes, not looking for fireplaces or ovens or pots and pans. Do you think there are any physical changes on your body that we might see? Right, we might be getting bigger and getting bigger brains. That's one. What's another one?
Arms and legs. Sorry, can you repeat that?
What's a way, especially from the head? Look at the head. What's a way that we might tell that people are cooking their food, eat it versus eating it raw on the head? Yeah, the teeth. How might our teeth change? Less worn, they're probably less big too, right? Our teeth are pretty small compared to like those gorillas' teeth because we're not grinding stuff up all day. This is like, we have this subfield of anthropology called cyborg anthropology. It's a cool term. But it's looking at how our bodies have adapted to technology. And this is really one of the first cases that we have this, right? You don't need these big chomping teeth if you're cooking your food. And we see that selection pressure for big teeth kind of go away. And Homo erectus and especially as we get towards modern humans, much smaller teeth, because we have basically we used to process everything in our mouths. And now we've like offloaded that onto an outside technology, right? We have a cooking fire, and the cook fire is gonna do most of the work for us. So cooking, it's great, right? And it's one of those first things, if you think of like the caveman, right? Quest for fire, this is like what makes us human. And so by that indication, I'd say Homo erectus is pretty human, right? If they're hunting and they're cooking things, that seems pretty human, because we don't see that any other animal in the animal kingdom. There doesn't seem to be any other creature that uses fire to eat their food. So I think it's a pretty good indication of humanity, right? And we'll talk about some of the other ones. But fire isn't just for cooking. What else can you do with fire? Fire's awesome. You ever been camping? Yeah, keep warm, right? And if you look here, humans used to live in Africa, right? Africa's pretty toasty. It's very nice, pretty temperate. What about up here? We found, we'll talk about a fossil site next time up in Siberia. We're going to talk about people living up here during the Ice Age, right at the base of the glaciers. Fire is going to be super important, right? You're going to freeze if you don't have that kind of technology to keep you warm at night. But that's not all that fire does. What else can fire do? Light, right? You're sitting around, and if you've ever been camping, camping without a fire or light is not very fun, right? Like it's dark, I'm just going to go to bed. And we live in a very like managed environment. These creatures did not live in a managed environment. What is out there in the dark? Yeah, it scares things away. There's scary big things out there that would like to eat you when you're sleeping. Lions and tigers, bears, oh my, right? Like fire keeps things away, right? Stay away from fire. A lot of creatures, especially predators, are kind of scared of fire. So we got kind of the defensive aspect. We got to keep you warm. We got to give you food to eat. Does fire do anything else? What else can fire do for you? Like a fire salesman today.
You also signal with it.
You could signal to it, right? There's a fire, I'm here. Smoke signals from far away. See that? Yeah, you can, it helps you make clothing. It also, if you remember Asher, in his talk on Friday about stone tools, says that one thing you can do with stone tools is you can put them in the fire. It helps the moisture evaporate out from the rock, and it makes them harder. It can also be used for hunting. How might fire be used for hunting? You know what people use fire for hunting? It's still in a lot of traditional societies until the 20th century did this. What was that? Yeah, you corral the animals. You basically burn the landscape. We see this in Aborigine populations in Australia. We see it in Native Americans in North America. You basically burn a landscape, and especially if you start a fire and you know it's going one direction, you can basically wait at the other end as all the creatures run out of the burning forest. So you can get them. And we actually know that Homo erectus had fire. It's not just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool, or isn't it a hypothesis? And we can actually find in caves both in South Africa, primarily we find them in China and other places as well. Indications of fire, right? Caves are a great place for this because you don't get that kind of debris, or you let debris kind of build up. You don't have like, rains come and wash it away. And we can find these burned layers in a cave. And if we find them on the landscape, often people are like, maybe it's a lightning strike, or maybe it's a natural fire. But if you find a fire in a cave, it's a pretty good indication that somebody made it. Why? Yeah, there's not a lot of burning stuff in caves. They're usually pretty wet, damp environments, not like grass and trees, right? So it seems much more purposeful, right? And especially when we find it in context with both stone tools and like pieces and parts of animals. Like people are sitting there processing animals, eating some steaks or some ribs and throwing the trash behind. And fire. This is, again, if you have stone tools and you have fire, you are on your way, I think. We also tend to find maybe some shelters, right? We talked about Homo erectus and like, probably had some camps or something, or ranges. But we get to Homo erectus, we tend to see something, right? And especially we can find this archaeologically because we'll find things like a hearth, right? Like a fire pit, find the burned area. And then we'll often find stuff around it, right? Especially if you're sitting around the fire at night, making stone tools. You can think about when we made stone tools, how that debris cloud kind of forms around you. Or if you're processing animals, if you're making hides into clothes, that stuff is going to be located usually either, if this is the fire and these are the seats right here, it's either going to be right in front of you, or it's going to be behind you because you're throwing trash behind you. So we can actually map these little home bases. The last thing I want to talk about, right? So again, much bigger brains between humans and Australopithecus. The last thing is, again, talking about kind of this dispersal from Africa. For a long time, we kind of had this idea that Homo erectus was the creature that left Africa and settled around the world. We've been finding Homo erectus skeletons since the early 20th century and lots of different places, like in China, in Europe, in Africa, and things like that. There was this idea that it was pretty late in Homo erectus evolution, basically just before we turned human, modern human Homo sapien, and basically left Africa and conquered the world. But beginning in like the 1990s, new sites began to come out, especially in this area. This is the Caucasus, used to be kind of the former Soviet Union, the Republic of Georgia after the collapse of the USSR. And I think it's probably one of the reasons that this finds weren't as publicized in the 80s, right? Because it was caught up in all this Cold War politics and US scientists didn't have access to the site, or they didn't want to believe that those dirty commies had something of value, right? But a site was discovered here in Georgia, which is right in the Caucasus, a site called Dmanisi or Dmanisi, depending on your pronunciation. And it's a very old site, right? It's like 1.8 to 1.6 million years ago. And it's so right at the beginning of Homo erectus, pretty close to the beginning. And it's very old and it's very archaic looking, and nobody was expecting it there, right? People were looking in Africa for fossils, and they weren't even really looking for hominins in the site, right? Because they were excavating like a medieval church in Georgia, right? Because this is like a really old bastion of Christianity, especially as kind of the Islamic conquest of the Middle East. This is one of the like holdout areas, right? So people were interested, and it was part of this like Georgia nationalistic project, right? As the Soviet Union kind of fell, Georgia wanted to have something of their own to like show their culture, right? So they started excavating this old church, and they were like getting the stuff that they thought, you know, like coins and swords and helmets and stuff like from knights and castles ages, right? But then they started going deeper, and they started finding like prehistoric stuff like mammoths and mastodons and saber-toothed tigers. This was kind of weird. And then going back even further, they started finding stone tools. And the stone tools were not like these big Acheulean hand axes. They weren't very complex. They seemed to be really simple tool technology, almost like old Yuan choppers. And then they started to find human remains, these hominin remains. And they seem to be Homo erectus, but they seem to be a very like early form of Homo erectus. And it was a really important find because it tells us that like basically as soon as people left, became Homo erectus, they started moving out of Africa and moving into these different environments. So I'm going to show you a video, kind of the last thing or second to last thing we're going to do today about this discovery of the site at Dmanisi in Georgia, and then we'll discuss the significance and we'll wrap up. Or Dmanisi, depending on how you say it. How is it? Why is it an important site? Yeah, it's a very complete skull, and it's outside of Africa, right? And it's really old, almost the beginning of Homo erectus. So it shows that the humans left a lot earlier than previously thought, right? So Homo erectus has lots of big things going for it, right? Leaving Africa, this kind of advanced toolkit, the Acheulean toolkit, big game hunting, control of fire, spears probably, campsites. The other thing that I think is really interesting, that we're going to kind of end on, is where we find Homo erectus is not just, you know, like they left Africa. Isn't that cool? But we often find them on islands, especially over here in what's today Indonesia and the Philippines, right? And these are islands that probably at one time were connected, but not all the way, right? So there needs to be some way to get out to islands, either like the island of Flores as we find them. We'll talk about that next time or on Friday, where it's still, there is a gap even when the sea levels are down. So what does that imply as well? How would they get to those islands? Even if you can see it way over there, where might you go? You might swim, maybe they're good swimmers, but anyone ever tried to swim across? Especially if you're holding your stuff and your little baby and stuff. They might have also had a boat or raft, right? Some kind of even something simple like lashing logs together or something like that. We're not talking about like ocean going vessels yet, but some way to cross these straits of water, which again is something that we've never seen kind of out of the African populations before the Australopithecus or Homo habilis. So Homo habilis spreads out to all these different areas, and over a very long period of time, unlike modern humans today, we can get on an airplane and go to Europe or Asia and meet somebody, fall in love, have some babies. We start to see Homo erectus kind of moving into these different areas of the old world in pretty small populations and beginning to speciate, meaning turning into different types of creatures, right? So up here we see Neanderthals, we see Denisovans or Denisovans kind of up in here, other possible species in the Philippines, as well as Flores down here, the little people or the hobbits of Flores, as well as Homo sapiens in Africa. So for the next 2-3 days or so, we're going to be kind of touring around to some of Homo erectus's descendants and taking a look at Neanderthals and some of these other Neanderthal-like creatures which inhabited the world, kind of following Homo erectus. So that's it for today. Next time we'll be moving up from the lower Paleolithic to the middle Paleolithic, moving forward in time, right? We're almost there. We're almost to modern times. So come back and we'll talk about Neanderthals, probably our most famous Paleo-human next time. See you then.